5 minutes before we record, regardless of who the guest is, the thing that I will always do is sit them down and remind them who the audience of the show is and what the objective of the episode is as well. I remind them that it's a podcast, we can start and stop anytime, and even the biggest speakers in the world, that just puts them so much at ease. I've been speaking to a few people that are on the podcasting circuit, and they can tell if you have used AI for your questions, because all of the questions are starting to sound the same. They're being formatted the same, and they're even appearing in the same order when people are scripting up episodes and asking the exact questions that Claude has. So something I have been asked about for years is our research process and how we script up episodes. Now, we use AI. I love AI. It has given us so much information at our fingertips, and it has given us information that we would never have access to, or it would take us hours and weeks to prep and find. So I'm going to walk you through exactly what we do for our process now, and 3 things that, whether it's me doing it or any of our clients, always make our guests walk away and say, this was one of the best interviews that I've ever had. They are always really positive about it. They're so excited for the episodes to come out, and they're really easy. People just don't focus on these. So let's start with the research process. Now, AI is one of my favorite things. I love using it, especially in the prep process. It is something that I've mentioned on podcasts before. You need to know your facts, and you need to ask it for the correct citations so that it's pulling actual true data. Like every time I script, there is always something in there that's false. Like one of our clients went out and built out a brief the other day, and I went through it and I was like, that's wrong. That's 5 years old. Like, because I had done my own research and knew that guest intimately, and our prompting has these things built in so that we don't get false results, there were things that I just picked up straight away. So if you want access to the prompts that we use for research, head to the show notes. I'll have them in there. Or if you're on Instagram, just send me the word scripts and I'll send it across to you as well, because these have been an absolute game changer for us, not just in terms of the questions that we get, but also accuracy of them as well. Now, when we're choosing topics and things to talk about, there are 3 things that we do for every single one. The first one is actually from Chris Williamson. So if you've listened to the episode that I did with Morgan Nelson a couple of months ago, he actually sat down with Chris and said, what was the one thing that grew your show? What was the thing that just completely changed everything? And it was going onto the guest page and seeing what were the outliers. What were the things that they posted about that their audience got really excited about? They were engaging, there was heaps of comments, they were really excited, or they were asking lots of questions about. So really good hack for this is actually going, if they have a YouTube account, and looking at the comments. What are the unanswered questions that they haven't done content on? This is something that we always start with, and it's something that I always just do and then keep in the back of our mind, because we don't want this to be Claude or ChatGPT script. We want this to be your questions. They're a reflection of you, that if you had no assistance from AI, would kind of be what you would want to ask anyway. So we have them as something for you to just keep in the back of your mind as you go through the rest of the process. The second thing that every good topic has is that we're talking about something that they haven't spoken about before, because when you have a guest on, you're borrowing their audience. So we have an opportunity for those people that are following that person to come and listen to your podcast. Now, if it's something that they've spoken about, a framework, a story, a part of their life that they have spoken about time and time and time again, their audience is just gonna be like, I've seen that, I know that story, and not be likely to do it. Whereas if it's something that is like, I've never spoken about this before, or actually like, this is a part that I haven't shared. If you can get them to say those words and you can turn that into a clip, obviously win. That is a huge, huge advantage for you. But it's an opportunity for you to sell an episode and promote it as something that they haven't spoken about, that their audience is probably going to be likely interested in, especially if you've done this research piece at the start. So we're looking at what has been performing on their page. What haven't they spoken about? The last thing I look at when I'm scripting up any topics at all is thinking about the entire outcome of the episode. For every episode, you know how sometimes you'll listen to it, and I'm all for a good entertainment podcast, but even the best entertainment podcasts kind of have a thread. If you start listening to this episode, this is what you're going to achieve. This is what you're going to learn. This is what you're going to walk away from. Sometimes if you try and cram too much in there and you're telling someone's, founder story, and then you're talking about their childhood and you're talking about this aspect and that aspect and like all these different facets of your life, you don't get the opportunity to go deep into topics, but you also just almost give your listeners whiplash, especially if you're jumping from topic to topic to topic. Like the best podcasts, even the ones that are entertaining, you'll notice when they have a guest on, there's often usually like a really good flow to it, like a book. And there's moments, and you can engineer this again with all of your scripting. There's moments where you're building anticipation and getting people excited and you're getting them bought in and invested into the story. And then like you're building all of that up to a peak where you're potentially telling a story. And then straight after that, you're re-engaging them, because every time throughout your episode, you need those moments of re-engagement. Now, this sounds super technical and advanced. It's not. If you pull all of this back to what is the outcome that they're going to get from this episode, that will just make sure that all of the topics that you're doing are going to fall into that. Like, I want them to walk away with this, this, and this. Now, the way that we structure this to ensure that we are kind of mapping out a story flow and building engagement is we will have topics and section blocks. So there's like an intro. I'll talk about that in a minute because that is a huge part of why guests often love our podcasts. But we'll have their introduction where we're building credibility. We're talking about who they are, what's coming up in the episode. And then those pieces, they flow onto each other. And in our minds, my mind especially, I will always have my little segue moment. So what is the last question that's going to help me to segue into that new topic? Now, I don't always follow my scripts. None of our clients do. And I would really recommend against doing that, because then you're just worried about exactly what question is on here. Like, again, these cards always have my rough kind of plan of where I want things to go. An episode I recorded earlier, we had like, merch was something that we really wanted to cover. We actually started talking about it way back earlier in the start. And so we jump around from topic to topic depending on where the guest wants to take them. You still want this to be a conversation, but the 3 things that you need to check for every single time that you're doing one of these is, will their audience resonate with it? Will it be something that they haven't spoken about before? And is it something valuable that their audience and my audience are going to take away from as well? Once we've done that, I actually use Gemini a lot more rather than any other AI tool right now, because it has access to YouTube and Google and all of this incredible data and information, which Claude can, and it does go onto websites, it goes onto Instagram, it pulls all this information, but Gemini has all of this baked in. So I'm finding for research and scripting, the information you can get from Gemini is phenomenal. The questions themselves, if you don't prompt it correctly, they can be really, really basic, high level, almost just like dot points and not have a lot of substance to them. So it's really good as a brainstorming buddy, but not kind of as detailed as Claude or ChatGPT can be. When you're looking at that, you kind of want to build a prompt that is going to give you a full research dossier. Now, in this, you need to make sure that it has citations, because the number of times I have pulled research and I know these guests intimately. I still do some of my old school research, like jumping on their LinkedIn, seeing all their latest posts, looking at their Instagram, also go to their website, read their about me, like really simple things that take me 5 minutes, but it gives me a baseline for fact checking of like, is this correct? Is this not? I'll then ask whatever system LLM I am using to pull and include citations for where it got its information from. You can also ask it to flag those things that might be misinformation as well, but keep it really simple. Do your research, ask for citations, get all the piece of information, and then also ask it. It knows your audience. It should have that briefed into your project files if you're on Claude, or into your prompts, wherever you are doing this. And it should have the context of who your listeners are. What you want to feed it as well is who their audience is and what they're interested in. And then finding the cross section, as I mentioned at the start, of what those topics of interest could be. Now, when you go into it, the best topics and research and advice will always be the ones where you are looking at things that tap into macro trends. So what is trending in the world right now? How can you bring that into your conversation as well? So we'll often say it's a educational podcast. We'll look at what are the top things that this type of person is searching for on Google. We used to use Answer the Public for this years ago. Now we just use Gemini for this because obviously it's pulling from Google. And we will see what are all the top questions that people are asking in this field. We then also look at like what is trending on social media, what's trending in pop culture, what are things that relate to the topic. So example, marketing podcast, the start of the year, everyone was talking about road. So wherever we could in topical episodes that would be releasing around the same time, we would borrow again and leverage authority from those things that were trending. And this is something that if you have listened to the episode with Zachary Owings, who works for Gary Vee's team, he did this with his podcast. And you'll notice nearly all of their clips, the first 3 seconds aren't them. They're somebody else because again, they're borrowing attention. They're borrowing authority from those people. So if you can bring hype into your podcast by talking about something that is trending, it's another really cool way to get attention on your podcast. So these are all tiny little things that we build into our scripting process, looking at those 3 qualifiers for is this a good topic, and then looking and layering macro trends and what people are actually searching for on top of it. Once you've got all your questions, go through, just see if there is stuff in there that really stands out to you. And again, think about that person listening from their audience. Would they find this an interesting conversation? But never forget your own audience because that is who's here every single week, right? Like you are building it for your own audience. And in the back of your mind, you're keeping in mind their audience as well. Now, the 3 things that we built in, your intro. I talk about this all the time. You'll notice we never, ever do it on our show. I will never ask someone for their origin story. Very rarely. I feel like there would be a couple of people in this world that I would want to dive into that if they haven't been on lots of podcasts. But for most people, they've told it 1,000 times. And the question that I would ask yourself when you're wondering whether you should or not is their origin story relevant for your audience? Have your audience heard it before, or are they going to get a lot of value about it? Now, in saying that, don't not include it at all because there have been so many podcasts that I've listened to and I've been like, this is a cool story. Like this is interesting. I'm listening to it because I've subscribed to the show. I get 3/4 or nearly all the way to the end and I find out who that person is, what they've done and their accomplishments. I'm like, oh, if I knew this from the start, I would have been paying so much attention. Like this person has raised $500 million. They are stocked in like Sephora and Ulta and all of these places. Like if I knew that, my view and perspective of them would have changed because maybe we weren't talking about all their business success at the start. So what you always want to do is build credibility in your intros, but potentially not include that founder story. For a majority of podcasts, it's not something that I would recommend. And every guest who sits in this chair has said to me, thank you for not doing that because they have done it again 100 times. They're sick of it. Everyone is sick of it. Not recommended. 5 minutes before we record, regardless of who the guest is, the thing that I will always do is sit them down and remind them who the audience of the show is and what the objective of the episode is as well. So for How Do I Podcast, I'll sit down and say, okay, reminder, the people listening to this, they're either really wanting to start a podcast or they've got one and they want to grow. Often they are also business owners. So they have these goals to weave the podcast into their business or monetize it, but probably not from like traditional methods of monetizing or they have really big aspirations and they're doing big brand partnerships. And we'll talk about how we want to actually position them and who the people are that are listening. I'll then talk about why, again, I've got them in the room with me. So there's so much we could talk about today, but I'm thinking, this, and this are going to be the key things that are really going to drive value, but also maybe like this and this. And I remind them that it's a podcast. We can start and stop anytime. If they start saying something they don't like it, just stop, we'll cut it out. And even the biggest speakers in the world, that just puts them so much at ease because sometimes they will go off on a tangent. And I've seen this happen is they will go off on one train of thought and then halfway through be like, oh, actually, I wish I said that. And if you don't give them permission to change it, they'll often just go back on that train of thought. They'll get to the end and they'll be like, oh, that was really shit. I just wasn't my best today. I've seen that happen. So we always frame this up as like, how can you give them permission to deliver the best podcast that they possibly can as well? And always ask them, do you have any questions? Is there anything that you really want to cover that you don't? Now, ideally, you've done this all in your pre-interview questions. I'd still ask it as well. Your goal with this is to make them as comfortable as possible. Like Nick will always laugh at me. The things that we talk about before we're recording, we do that little spiel, we chat about that, and then we'll just start talking about like, what they did on the weekend or where they're going after this. And my goal is to always make them feel as humanly comfortable as possible and get them like excited for the show and comfortable with me as well. I remember when when I was interviewing with Kaylee Adsina, she was so funny. And she did mention it whilst we were recording as well. I was talking about like, her kids and my kids and what we were doing and why we stayed at the Langham and all this other stuff. And she was like, that just made me feel so comfortable and like I knew you as well, which kind of building that trust and that rapport. 5 minutes can do so much if you use it properly. Like imagine if I just sat here really awkward and nervous, which I often am, and I'm just sitting here going, okay, all right, let's start recording. Like it's just going to create such an awkward conversation, whereas you have that moment to actually build connection. And I have created the most incredible friendships from people that I've interviewed. So 5 minutes before is actually really powerful. The last thing that we have started doing a little more intentionally recently, we've always done it and I've really made it a focus for the team in the last month or so, is to start to engineer clips based on what your guest would actually want to share, what their audience are resonating with, what would perform well. Now, previously, we've always looked at our strategy of like conversion from Instagram to podcast. That is our number one thing that we want to do, is get someone on short form to go and listen to the long form. That is one of the most impossible tasks. It can be done. There are some really cool strategies on that. I think I'll do an episode on that in a few weeks for you and just break them down. I'm starting to test a few things at the moment. Hooray, finally. But there's some really cool strategies there that aren't necessarily clips. But a clip is an opportunity to get your guest to collaborate with you. Now, when you're asking them to collaborate, they want to be like proud of the content that they're putting out there. They want to be excited about the podcast and telling people and sharing it. If you choose their most vulnerable moment, the moment where they're sharing something that potentially doesn't position them in a really good light, some people will share that. Some people might go, oh God, is that like what I spoke about on there? Like that's a bit confronting or overwhelming. And you've just got to think about what type of person are they and what type of thing could I share that would get them excited to share on their page as well. Because you want to promote that this episode is out. You also want to tease what's in the episode and what's coming up. But your biggest thing is creating content that someone else can use and be really grateful and excited for it. Now, again, there's so many different ways you can push to the podcast from there. So I would say think outside the box of what type of content you could create. Now, a little bonus tip that I actually wasn't going to share in this, but I think is actually really important is your guest workflow. Now, I have been a guest on a few podcasts now. We have obviously had multiple guests on all of our shows. Something that is a huge missed opportunity that a lot of people don't do is think about their correspondence with their guest. So what we do and what has worked really well is the day before you're sending a reminder, hey, can't wait to record with you tomorrow. Here are the like high level topics. I don't ever recommend giving the exact questions, but high level topics we're going to cover on the day. Any questions? Here's who to contact. This is the address, blah, blah, blah. Just give them that like little refresher. Day of recording, perfect. Whether you send it that same day or the day after, just send them a thank you. It can be on Instagram, it can be an email, whatever it is in your process. Make sure you are thanking them again for your time. Most people do that. Some people are just so busy they completely forget. So if you need that reminder, bake that into your workflow. And then what we want to do is let them know that the episode is coming up, because if they know it's coming up, they're going to be looking out for a collaboration. They're going to be looking out for the episode. And in your correspondence with them, you should have the link so it makes it really easy for them to share. So if they want to send it out to their email database or they want to add it to their website, if they have a YouTube channel, there is an option for you to actually add them as a collaborator on YouTube, which is really important because it lets you share, again, your episode onto their page with their audience. You get served in their feeds as recommended by the algorithm. Really, really important to make sure you do that. And it's a link that you've got to generate and you have to send it to them. So make sure you're doing that. And then you can prepare them to say, this is coming out. I'll of course tag you in everything, but if you have any questions, you want to change anything, please let me know. Some guests will want to review the content before it goes live. So you might have to add that as a step in there. Out of, the hundreds and almost thousands of guests we've had now, we have had a really small percentage of people who actually want to do that. But there are definitely, especially in legal, medical spaces, people that will have that as part of their process. And then these things sound so simple, but if you don't remind someone that their episode is coming out, one day they'll just get a collaboration for you. They might not be online. They might not be looking for it. They might have other content planned for that day. So it's just something that we have noticed as we have had this in our process. We have had a higher number of collaborations, a higher amount of sharing, and people that are so excited about the podcast as well. So that is kind of like our base framework that I would recommend. The part that will really change things for you is if you ask for feedback. Now, it's up to you where you put this in your process. I will sometimes do it in that thank you message if they are a really close friend or someone that I've built a lot of rapport with, or someone in the industry. I'll be like, okay, cool. Absolutely loved our conversation. Tell me, one, were there any moments that you loved that I'll make sure that we turn into clips? And two, do you have any feedback for you? Like anything that you want to change that you think we could do differently? Any thoughts on the whole process? And most people are really lovely and polite. I've got some incredible feedback from that as well about what they did love that I need to make sure that I'm doing. That founder story is always one. And then again, when the assets go out, I actually asked them, I was like, was there any other moments that if you loved that you wanted to see turned into a clip? Do you have any feedback on it? One of our guests that was on hadn't accepted a collaboration. And I asked for any feedback and they're like, oh, do you think it would be okay to just like change the branding colors a little bit in the feed cover? I was like, of course, absolutely. So I changed it so it matched their page more. And then they collaborated straight away. We got massive number of views on that. So just inviting them to have a conversation with you can completely change the relationship with your guest as well and give you moments and opportunities that you'd otherwise just miss out on. If you have loved this, I'm going to package up all of the prompts, pop them into the show notes, as I said before, and let me know what other solo topics you want to see from this show moving forward. As I said, I think I'm going to do one on these different types of content that we're actually seeing perform, but there is so much happening in the space right now, particularly with YouTube. I've never seen anything like the growth we're seeing on YouTube at the moment, and I think a lot of people can learn from that, whether they are podcasting or they are just creating content in general. So watch this space. Any thoughts, any questions, as always, reach out on How Do I Podcast or Alicia Chapman _, and I will see you next week, guys. This episode, insane. We have been planning this for such a long time. I cannot wait for you to hear it. If you are not following or subscribing, make sure you do, and I will see you then.